Excuse me. Staff shouldn't interrupt executives. Tyler Vaughn didn't even turn his head when he said it. The words landed in the boardroom like a slap. For a moment no one spoke. Then a few people around the long glass table gave quiet, nervous laughs. I stood frozen near the door, holding a stack of printed shareholder reports against my chest. My mouth was still half open because I had been about to speak. Tyler leaned back in his chair, one arm draped over the leather seat like he owned the building. Just leave the copies on the table, he added lazily. That's what staff is here for. More uncomfortable chuckles followed. My fingers tightened around the papers. I forced myself to walk forward and place the reports in front of the board members. Tyler never looked at me, but as I turned to leave, one quiet thought formed in my head. He had just dismissed the person who wrote the line that would destroy his career. And he didn't even know it. My name is Megan Whitaker. For 6 years, I worked as a financial compliance analyst at Harrington Freight Systems, one of the largest logistics companies in the United States. Most people inside the company didn't really understand what my job meant. They thought I was some kind of accountant who read spreadsheets all day. The truth was simpler. I looked for risks. I studied contracts, shipping routes, vendor agreements, and financial filings. My job was to find problems before regulators or investors found them first. It wasn't glamorous work. Most executives barely knew my department existed. But I knew the company's numbers better than almost anyone in the building. And lately, those numbers had started telling a story that made my stomach twist. Because the person making the biggest decisions in the company had absolutely no idea what he was doing. And the boardroom humiliation from that morning was only the beginning. Tyler Vaughn joined the company 3 months earlier. No interview. No announcement about qualifications. Just a short email sent to every employee at 8 in the morning. Please welcome Tyler Vaughn as Director of Strategic Development. Everyone understood what it meant. Tyler was the son of Charles Vaughn, the company's CEO. Nepotism wasn't new in corporate America, but Tyler didn't even pretend to earn his position. He arrived in expensive suits and drove a silver sports car that everyone noticed in the parking garage. During meetings, he spoke loudly and confidently about disrupting outdated systems. But people who actually worked in those systems knew something immediately. Tyler never asked questions. He made decisions quickly and expected everyone else to deal with the consequences. At first, most employees stayed quiet. But inside the compliance department, we watched his choices very carefully. Because reckless decisions create very expensive problems. And Tyler had already started making several of them. The first red flag appeared during Tyler's second week. He called a meeting with department managers and announced that several long-term vendor contracts would be canceled. These partners are overpriced, he said, tapping his pen against the table. One operations manager shifted uncomfortably. Those vendors handle most of our regulatory inspections. Tyler waved his hand like the comment didn't matter. We'll find cheaper options. The room stayed quiet, but my chest tightened. Those vendors were not random suppliers. They handled safety inspections, shipping documentation, and international compliance checks. Without them, our regulatory risk score would increase. A lot. After the meeting, I ran the numbers again in my office. The system produced the same result each time. If those contracts disappeared, the company's risk threshold would climb dangerously close to the limit. And Tyler had canceled them without asking compliance for a single opinion. Every quarter, our company released a shareholder risk report. It was massive. 200 pages of financial summaries, risk assessments, regulatory updates, and legal disclosures. Most executives skimmed the first few pages. Many board members didn't read it at all. But the report mattered more than people realized. Because once it was published, the company was legally bound by the statements inside it. I spent weeks preparing the compliance sections. Charts, numbers, and explanations that described exactly how safe or risky our operations were. Most people treated the report like background paperwork. But buried deep inside those pages were rules that controlled how the company responded to major threats. And one of those rules sat quietly on page 187. Almost no one remembered it existed. But I remembered. Because years earlier, after a regulatory investigation, I had helped write the update myself. The clause was simple but powerful. After a shipping compliance crisis 5 years earlier, the board created a special protection rule. If the company's regulatory risk score passed a specific threshold, the compliance department could trigger an emergency review. That review forced the board to investigate the decision that caused the risk. It also gave compliance temporary authority to pause the executive responsible. Most executives forgot about the rule. Some newer managers had never even heard of it. But the clause was still printed clearly inside every shareholder report. Page 187. I had personally updated the wording last year when new regulations were introduced. The rule wasn't designed for revenge. It existed to protect the company from dangerous leadership decisions. But the more I reviewed Tyler Vaughn's choices, the more I realized something uncomfortable. He was moving the company closer to that threshold. And he didn't even know the rule existed. 2 weeks after the boardroom humiliation, Tyler announced his biggest project yet. A massive overseas shipping contract with a new partner company in Southeast Asia. The numbers looked impressive on the surface. Projected profits were huge. Tyler presented the deal like a brilliant breakthrough. But as I read the contract documents, I felt my stomach sink. The partner company had weak compliance records. Their shipping documentation process was incomplete. Several regulatory flags appeared in the system almost immediately. I requested a meeting with Tyler's department to discuss the risk. The request was ignored. 2 days later, the contract was signed. Just like that. When I entered the numbers into our compliance system, the result appeared on the screen in bright red. The company's risk score had crossed the threshold. Page 187 was no longer theoretical. That night I sat alone in my office staring at my laptop. My email program was open. I had typed a message addressed to Tyler Vaughn. It explained the compliance threshold clearly. It warned him that the new contract triggered a serious review requirement. All he needed to do was adjust the deal structure, and the risk score would drop. My finger hovered over the send button. For a moment, I imagined his reaction. He would probably laugh. Or worse, dismiss the warning just like he had dismissed me in the boardroom. Staff shouldn't interrupt executives. I deleted the email. Compliance rules didn't require me to warn him personally. My responsibility was to document the numbers and follow procedure. And procedures had very clear next steps. So I closed my laptop and began preparing the official compliance report. Over the next month, I worked quietly. Compliance analysts are trained to document everything. Every contract approval. Every internal warning. Every risk calculation. I saved copies of Tyler's signed documents and attached them to the quarterly review file. No accusations. Just facts. Meanwhile, Tyler continued celebrating his new overseas partnership. He gave interviews to industry magazines and talked about bold leadership. Inside the company, many employees felt uneasy. Operations teams struggled with the new shipping procedures. Several minor compliance alerts appeared in our system. Each one pushed the risk score a little higher. But Tyler seemed completely confident. He walked through the office like a man who believed nothing could touch him. The CEO's son rarely expects consequences. But numbers don't care about family connections. Numbers only tell the truth. And the truth was getting harder to ignore. The government audit notice arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning. I was reviewing shipment records when the email appeared in my inbox. Subject line, Regulatory Compliance Audit Request. Audits happen regularly in the logistics industry. Usually, they are routine. But the timing made my pulse quicken. The auditors specifically requested documentation related to overseas shipping partners, which meant they would examine Tyler's new contract first. I printed a notice and walked it down the hallway to the legal department. Within an hour, the news spread through the executive floor. Managers whispered in conference rooms. Phones rang constantly. Tyler, however, reacted very differently. Later that afternoon, I heard him laughing outside a meeting room. Relax, he told a group of department heads. Audits happen all the time. He sounded completely calm, which confirmed something important. He still had not read the shareholder report. A week later, Tyler hosted another strategy meeting. I attended quietly, sitting near the back wall with a tablet for notes. He spoke confidently about expanding the overseas contract even further. Several managers exchanged uneasy looks. Finally, someone asked about the compliance risks. Tyler smiled like the question was harmless. Our analysts worry too much, he said. Growth requires bold moves. His eyes briefly passed over me. For half a second I wondered if he remembered the boardroom incident. But his expression showed no recognition at all. To him, I was invisible. Just another employee sitting in the background. I lowered my eyes to the tablet screen. Because the compliance report I had prepared that morning was already scheduled for submission. Once it was filed, the system would automatically notify the board. And Tyler Vaughn would finally learn what page 187 actually meant. Filing the compliance escalation took less than 10 minutes. I uploaded the risk calculations, attached the contract documentation, and referenced the shareholder report clause. Everything followed standard company procedure. No drama. No accusations. Just numbers and rules. Once submitted, the system generated an automatic notice to the board of directors. An emergency review meeting was required within 14 days. Most employees had no idea the process had even started. Tyler certainly didn't. He spent the rest of the week celebrating his international expansion plans. Meanwhile, I continued my normal work. But inside, a quiet tension built every day. Because the next board meeting would look very different from the last one. And this time I wouldn't be standing silently near the door. This time the board wanted answers. And I was the person who had them. 2 weeks later, I stood outside the same boardroom door where Tyler Vaughn had humiliated me. The memory still burned in the back of my mind. Staff shouldn't interrupt executives. Through the glass wall, I could see the board members taking their seats. Tyler sat near the center of the table beside his father, Charles Vaughn. He looked relaxed, confident, almost bored. I carried a tablet and a folder filled with compliance reports. My hands felt steady, even though my heart was beating faster than usual. When the board chair finally opened the door, I walked inside and took a quiet seat along the side wall. Tyler glanced around the room casually. Then the chair cleared his throat. Before we continue the quarterly review, he said, we need clarification regarding a compliance escalation. His eyes moved toward me. Megan Whitaker, he continued calmly, would you please explain the trigger referenced in the shareholder report? For the first time since the meeting started, Tyler Vaughn looked directly at me. I stood slowly and walked to the screen at the front of the room. 20 pairs of eyes followed me. Tyler leaned back in his chair, clearly expecting a routine update. I opened the digital copy of the shareholder report. Directors, I began, keeping my voice steady. This escalation relates to a clause within our compliance framework. I tapped the screen and enlarged the document. Page 187. The text appeared on the display. I read the line aloud. If regulatory risk exceeds the established threshold, the Compliance Division is authorized to initiate an emergency board review. The room grew quiet. Several directors leaned forward to read the paragraph more carefully. Tyler frowned slightly. I continued. This clause also requires the board to evaluate the executive decision responsible for the increased risk. One of the directors adjusted his glasses. Miss Whitaker, he asked slowly, are you saying the company has crossed that threshold? I nodded. Yes, sir. And then I opened the chart that showed exactly why. The graph filled the large screen. A simple risk chart with a bold red line across the middle. Below the line meant safe. Above the line meant danger. One bright marker sat clearly above it. Tyler leaned forward immediately. What exactly am I looking at? He asked. I kept my tone calm. That marker represents the regulatory risk created by the overseas shipping contract approved last month. Tyler's eyes narrowed. That deal is profitable, he said sharply. Yes, I replied, but the partner company has multiple compliance weaknesses. I pointed at several highlighted sections on the screen. Combined with the termination of several inspection vendors, the total risk score rose above the board's approved limit. One of the directors slowly flipped through the printed shareholder report in front of him. Another whispered something to the legal advisor. Tyler looked confused now. He grabbed his own copy of the report and began scanning the pages. "Wait," he muttered under his breath. He was finally reading page 187. The room stayed quiet while Tyler flipped through the report. His confidence slowly drained from his face. He stopped on the page and stared at the clause for several seconds. "This can't be right," he said finally. The legal advisor leaned forward. "It is correct," she said calmly. "The clause was approved after the regulatory investigation 5 years ago." Tyler looked toward his father. Charles Vaughn remained silent. The board chair folded his hands together. "Miss Whitaker," he said, "please confirm the numbers again." I switched the screen to the compliance dashboard. Every calculation appeared clearly. Contract risk score, vendor cancellations, inspection gaps, all documented. The final number sat in red, above the threshold. No one spoke for several seconds. Then Tyler leaned back in his chair and shook his head. "This is ridiculous," he said. But his voice no longer sounded confident. The board members began asking questions. Sharp questions. Detailed questions. When had the risk first appeared? Who approved the overseas contract? Which departments had raised warnings? I answered calmly and showed the documentation on the screen. Every answer pointed to the same conclusion. The decision belonged to Tyler Vaughn. Tyler tried to interrupt several times. "This is being exaggerated," he argued. But the numbers spoke clearly. One director turned to the legal advisor. "Under the clause," he asked, "what happens when the threshold is crossed?" The advisor adjusted a folder in front of her. "The board must conduct an immediate investigation," she said. She paused before continuing. "And the executive responsible for the decision may be temporarily suspended until the review is complete." The air in the room seemed to change instantly. Tyler blinked. "What?" Several board members exchanged quiet looks. The power in the room had just shifted. Tyler straightened in his chair. "This is insane," he said loudly. "You can't suspend someone over a technical chart." The legal advisor remained calm. "It is not a technical chart," she replied. "It is a regulatory risk calculation." Another board member spoke next. "The clause was designed to protect the company from leadership mistakes." Tyler looked toward his father again. "Dad, this is ridiculous." Charles Vaughn stayed silent. His expression had become very serious. The board chair turned toward the legal advisor once more. "Are we legally required to follow the clause?" "Yes," she answered. "Failure to act could expose the board to liability if regulators investigate." That sentence changed everything. Board members stopped looking uncertain. Now they looked cautious, careful, because protecting the company mattered more than protecting the CEO's son. Tyler was beginning to realize that. The board chair slowly folded his hands together. "Mr. Vaughn," he said to Tyler, "this review is not a punishment." Tyler gave a short, humorless laugh. "Feels like one." "It is a procedural safeguard," the chair continued. Another director spoke quietly. "The contract risk must be investigated before regulators notice it." Tyler's jaw tightened. "You're seriously considering suspending me over this?" No one answered immediately. Instead, several board members began reviewing the documents in front of them. I returned quietly to my seat near the wall. My role was finished. The numbers had already spoken. Tyler glanced in my direction once. For the first time since we had met, he seemed to recognize who I was. But the moment passed quickly. The board chair cleared his throat. "We will now vote on temporary suspension pending investigation." Tyler leaned back slowly. His earlier confidence had completely disappeared. 8 board members raised their hands. The vote happened quickly, faster than Tyler expected. The board chair looked toward him with a neutral expression. "The motion passes," he said. "Mr. Vaughn, you are temporarily relieved of executive authority until the compliance investigation is complete." Tyler stared at the raised hands around the table. "You're serious," he said quietly. The legal advisor slid a document across the table. "Company policy requires immediate enforcement." Tyler pushed his chair back abruptly. "This is unbelievable." 2 security officers appeared at the doorway a moment later. They had clearly been waiting outside. The board chair spoke gently. "You may return after the investigation concludes." Tyler looked around the room again. Then his eyes stopped on me for a second. I held his gaze calmly. Finally, he turned away and walked toward the door. No one laughed this time. The hallway outside the boardroom felt strangely quiet after Tyler left. Inside the meeting room, the board continued discussing the compliance investigation. I provided additional documentation when requested, but my job was mostly finished. The investigation would now be handled by legal teams and external auditors. When the meeting ended, I packed my tablet and documents into my bag. As I stepped into the hallway, I passed the same boardroom door where Tyler had once dismissed me. Staff shouldn't interrupt executives. The memory felt distant now. Several directors nodded politely as they walked past me. One even thanked me for the thorough compliance work. I returned to my office and continued reviewing shipping reports like any normal day. Because compliance work rarely looks dramatic from the outside. But sometimes quiet documentation changes the course of an entire company. And the investigation had only just begun. The investigation lasted several weeks. External auditors examined every part of the overseas shipping contract. Legal teams reviewed vendor cancellations and risk calculations. My department provided documents whenever they asked. Each review confirmed the same conclusion. Tyler had ignored several compliance warnings. He approved the contract without consulting regulatory specialists. He also canceled vendor inspections that would have lowered the risk score. None of these decisions were illegal by themselves, but together they created a serious exposure for the company. During this time, Tyler remained away from the office. Rumors spread through the building about what might happen next. Some employees felt nervous. Others quietly believed the company was finally correcting a dangerous mistake. I stayed focused on my work, because the numbers still needed to be monitored carefully. And one small error during the investigation could still create bigger problems. The final investigation meeting took place 6 weeks later. I was not part of the executive discussion, but the results became clear very quickly. Tyler Vaughn's contract decision had exposed the company to regulatory penalties. The board concluded that his leadership judgment could not be trusted. His suspension became permanent. News of the decision spread through the office within hours. Several employees looked relieved. Others looked shocked. But the biggest surprise came a month later. Charles Vaughn announced he would step down as CEO. Officially, it was described as a retirement. But everyone inside the company understood the real reason. The board wanted distance from the entire situation. Arrogance had created the problem. Now the company was rebuilding trust. And quietly, behind the scenes, the compliance department played a major role in protecting that future. One afternoon, I received an unexpected message from the board chair. He asked me to come to the executive floor. His office overlooked the entire city skyline. When I arrived, he offered a polite smile and gestured toward the chair across his desk. "Megan," he said, "I've been reviewing your work during the investigation." I nodded politely. "You handled the compliance escalation exactly as policy requires." He opened a folder and slid it across the desk. Inside was a formal document. "We need leadership that understands the company's risk structure," he continued. "The board would like you to become the new director of compliance." For a moment, I simply stared at the offer. 6 years earlier, I had entered the company as a junior analyst. Now the board wanted me to lead the entire compliance division. I finally looked up. "I accept," I said. 3 months later, I walked into the boardroom again. The same long table, the same glass walls, but everything felt different. This time I took a seat at the executive side of the table, not near the door, not standing with printed reports. A new quarterly shareholder report sat in front of every board member. I had written the compliance section again, but now everyone read it carefully. The board chair nodded toward me. "Director Whitaker," he said, "would you summarize the compliance outlook?" I stood and began explaining the numbers.
Calm.
Confident.
Prepared.
No one interrupted. And as I spoke, one quiet realization settled in my mind. Respect in business rarely comes from loud voices or powerful family names. It comes from competence. Because the people who truly protect a company are often the ones writing the reports no one else bothers to read. And this time, everyone was listening.